Hey, this is David with the Shepherd School, and today we're going to talk a little bit about terrorist tactics, force multipliers, and get into a little bit of weapons of mass destruction introduction right now. This is part of a much larger college class. Usually, when I talk about this, it lasts 2 or 3 hours, but I'll try to cut it down to 30 minutes or so. You know, as a society, we sort of sometimes have a little bit of difficulty defining terrorism. There's several different legal statute definition of terrorism. United Nations definition is different than the U.S. government's definition, which is different than probably your definition. Okay. However, it's not very difficult to describe terrorist tactics. Okay, and so let's look at some of the common things that terrorists use to accomplish their attacks. Obviously, bombing is the terrorist tactic that we're most familiar with, but it isn't just explosives. Bombing takes a whole gamut of things, and typically we call them weapons of mass destruction. Some people call them CBRN, meaning chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and explosive. And we'll talk about the difference between radiological and nuclear, but since all of them are some sort of explosive or chemically initiated device, we're going to lump them all into bombing. But terrorists also do a lot of hijacking, arsons, particularly our ecological terrorist groups here in America, assaults, kidnaps, hostage taking. Basically, they're willing to do whatever they need to or feel they need to in order to get their goals accomplished. And the whole idea is they want to increase their striking power, and so they use what they call force multipliers. And all a force multiplier is something that can increase your effectiveness without increasing the size of your unit. All right, and the bigger the unit seems to be, because they're able to strike at larger targets, the more effective they're going to look like, and the stronger they're going to seem. And all terrorist groups want to give the illusion that they're more powerful than they are, even if they're the biggest terror group in that area. If you study terrorism, and both sides, left wing terrorism, right wing terrorism, you look at historical revolutions, successful insurgency campaigns, you'll see that they all sort of have the same things. And the biggest one would be transnational support. If you are able to hide in one safe area, across a border, right, for instance, like the PLO did, crossing over into Jordan, Israel could not chase them across the border. Kind of think of Dukes of Hazzard, being chased. You get to the line, you cross the line, the other people can't chase you there. So transnational support is very important. Technology allows smaller groups to attack larger things, right? That's something that's growing. But when we say technology, we don't just mean, internet and computer technology, right? If you're got a piece of pipe and you stuff some gunpowder and some rocks in it and you make a little cannon, right? You get better technology, you end up with a semi-automatic rifle. Obviously, better technology is going to make you more effective. Then you've got media coverage. Media coverage, as we talked about in the media talk, is very important because it makes a group seem larger than it is. But what it can also do is help shape how people look at the group, right? If you're working toward the same goals that media agency accepts and wants, they can make you seem bigger. They can help you mold public support by framing, all sorts of different things. So media is very important. And then religion. Religion's a force multiplier because it transcends normal boundaries. If you've got everything framed as you're working for God, and if people work against you, they're the devil, right? And you believe in end time prophecy, and you believe that you are in the end times, and you're really not going to negotiate, right? Because you have everything to lose and everything to gain. And so religion can increase violence and decrease the ability to negotiate. So we'll talk about that in depth probably a little later, the role of eschatology in terrorist organizations. And we're not just talking about Islamic terrorists. All sorts of different groups use religion as a tool. So since we talked about technology, and I know that if we say terrorist technology, we're going to think cyber terrorism. Cyber terrorism is growing. And all cyber terrorism is hacking with a body cam. It's the use of computers to attack technological targets or physical attacks on computer networks. If somebody comes in and tries to blow up a power grid or a switching station or a computer node, that's also cyber terrorism, even though it's explosives. Recently got the privilege to listen to a talk by an FBI supervisor in cyber crimes, and he was saying that cyber crimes exceed the revenue of drug trafficking, that it is the new thing, that they can actually come in and look at attacks, denial of service attacks, and look at the computers that they're coming from, the IP addresses, and that they can watch it move throughout the globe because those computer attacks, those denial of service attacks are coming from infected computers that have been turned into bots or basically robots. And that these bots are active when the actual owner is asleep. So you go in and you click on that Facebook. I got a Twitter thing today. A guy said, "I can't believe that this picture you went out public," and it had a shortened URL. If I'd have clicked it, it would have gave me a virus probably. You get a virus, it takes over your computer. It knows when your normal patterns are, and so it doesn't do anything when you're on the computer, right? And when you're in sleep or you're not using the computer, it gets up, and then it does whatever its owner of that code wants it to do. Usually emailing out denial of service attacks or spreading viruses, or sometimes even storing things on your computer. So be real careful of bots or Trojans or keyloggers or malware or any of those things that come on your computer. Like if you're on Facebook, right? Facebook's great. You click things, you're eventually going to end up with code. So like I tell my wife, you're not allowed to use the bank software on the laptop, and I'm not allowed to use Facebook on the business computer, the work computer, all right? And hopefully that way, if her laptop gets infected, it won't infect, the other computer, right? And that's just something that you should do. And also with security, your password. Don't use the same password on everything. And we'll come in and probably do a video on that a little bit later. I've had to bone up on some cybersecurity after dealing with this big hacking attack on the TN Gun website. All right, if cyber's a new thing, let's look at what we have been afraid of, some of the older things, and that would be weapons of mass destruction. And let's start out with probably the scariest of the bunch, and that's biological. Biological agents aren't going to penetrate necessarily. Let's talk in generalities because this is a kind of an intro, but it's not going to penetrate unbroken skin, right? It's non-volatile, meaning that it isn't like gasoline that's going to evaporate out. So it's going to be kind of persistent. It's going to come in, it's going to spray, and it's going to stay, in an area. And it's more toxic than chemicals by weight. All right, we'll talk about chemical WMDs here in a second. Another thing about WMD bio is it's undetectable by the senses. You can't go in and open up a can, a jar of canned food, open it up and smell it and go, yep, that's got botulism in it, right? You're not going to be able to smell it or taste it or feel it, right? Just like, you get a virus or you get the common cold. You're not going to detect that somebody's got it. You might see some of the symptoms. And that leads you into limited field detection, right? Bio typically is going to be some sort of live agent. And so in order for somebody to come in and say, yeah, this is anthrax, or yeah, this is, Q fever, they're probably going to have to culture it, right? We had a spate here in my state. We had a whole bunch of white powder calls after 9/11, and I worked one particular case where had a white powder call to a courthouse, and it happened to be at the coffee station, on the floor right in front of the things a coffee creamer. And nobody really thought, and even if they did, you can't really joke around with that. But it took 24 hours for them to culture and rule out that it was some sort of biological agents. They thought really quickly, when they did some preliminary tests, that yeah, this is just coffee creamer, but it still takes 24 hours or so to culture it. So limited field detection, got to go to a lab, and typically it's going to be disseminated out as an aerosol, as a spray, because if you have an actual explosion with fire and heat and violence of action, it may end up killing what you want sprayed. So it's going to typically come out more as an aerosol, right? And there's a latency period, meaning that if you get attacked and you breathe in some anthrax spores, those spores are going to have to activate and grow and spread, and it may take a couple days to actually, take over your body before you start seeing symptoms. And that's the scary thing with bio, because somebody comes in, they're infected, they get on board a bus, they may not be showing signs yet, but they may have spread enough throughout their system where they are contagious. And so then everybody gets off the bus and they get on other buses, or they go home, or they get on an airplane, and they start spreading it. By the time people start showing symptoms, it could be out of control, right? Now, with the latency period, it also depends on, you get a standard dose and it's got to grow in your body. But there was a case in Russia where they were making this stuff by the ton, and one of the lab guys, they were supposed to change out the HEPA filters every shift, and he came in and he disconnected the HEPA filter and didn't have one, had to go get one. Then the buzzer rang, everybody went home. He's like, I'm a commie. I don't care about my job. They can't make me work any more than 8 hours. So he went home, left the big HEPA filter out, and it sprayed out anthrax into the city for a whole 8-hour shift. And people got such large doses of anthrax that they actually became symptomatic almost immediately, because they had so much that it already overwhelmed their symptoms, their bodies. So you have to kind of understand what's going on before you make big blanket statements. When we think about bioagents, we tend to think about bacteria or viruses, right? But it's not just bacteria and not just viruses. You also have ricket, you have toxins, and all of them are going to primarily be an inhalation hazard. But depending on what you are being attacked with, sometimes you have vaccines available, sometimes you have antibiotics, sometimes you have immunizations. But, a vaccine's not going to work on a toxin. An antibiotic's not going to work on a virus. If you've got a virus and you have an immunization, but you don't have one for that particular mutated strain, it's not going to work, right? So it is kind of scary. Now, with that, you have to realize that 10 countries are believed to possess weaponized forms of biological agents and are conducting research. So this stuff is out there. And there's all different kinds. You've got anthrax, which is a bacteria, plague, which, there is plague here in America naturally, Q fever, which is a rickettsia. You've got smallpox virus, Ebola virus. You've got Venezuelan equine encephalitis, VE virus. You've got all sorts of different toxins, botulismomycin. Those things are chemicals produced by the virus or produced by the bacteria, biological, so they're inert and basically they're poisons. So there's all sorts of things that you have to look out for. And then along the same lines, but a little bit different, you've got WMDs that are chemically based, right? And generally they're going to be liquid, especially when they're containerized, right? Held under pressure. And just like bio, they're also normally going to be disseminated as aerosols, because you've got a chemical, you don't want it burned up in the fire of an actual explosion, or if it's something like chlorine, out by gas. And because it's a liquid, because it's a gas, it's got some chemical properties, and so that may be influenced by weather conditions. You know, if it's rainy, that's going to tend to kind of push the gas down, and make it condense and stay in low-lying areas. And it can be protected against. If you know it's there, you can take precautions. And unlike bio, right? Because there's a lot of similarities. You see a guy in a Tyvek suit with a sprayer, and he's spraying this stuff out, and everybody's dying, right? It's probably going to be chemical, because chemicals are going to normally have immediate effects. You see a guy in a Tyvek suit and a spray bottle, he's spraying stuff, and he's spraying people, and they're like, "What are you doing?" And then they walk off, right? That's probably bio, right? If it's you're not some guy with just a spray in water, right? So chemicals normally going to be immediate, and that's the big thing to realize for trying to figure out what's going on. All right, so just like different kinds of bio, there's different kinds of chemical. You've got nerve, blood, blister, and capacitating agents, right? Nerve agents are cholinesterase inhibitors. And what they do is they mess up the nerve signal, the electrical signal that's going down the nerves, where they jump. It messes them up so that you don't have the signals to make your body function, meaning you can't breathe, your heart doesn't beat, right? Now, it always kind of amazes me that in a lot of these classes they'll say, okay, this smells like bitter almonds, this smells like newly mowed grass. Look, if you're in a mall, right, people doing the funky chicken, there's a guy spraying people with stuff, and you smell, newly cut grass, you're in a world of hurt, right? If you're smelling it, you're in it, right? But the antidote for this is not really an antidote, but in the military they give the little injectors. You've seen it on Nicolas Cage movies, whatever. They give you atropine and 2-pan chloride, and neither one of these actually cure the nerve agent. What they do is they're basically big shots of adrenaline. They send your body into overdrive to keep you alive long enough for this stuff to wear off, right? So that's what nerve agents are. Blood agents are things like cyanide, cyanide, whatever. This is going to affect your blood's ability to carry oxygen, right? And so a lot of the symptoms would be symptoms that somebody has asphyxiated. So lips blue under the fingernails, they're breathing really rapid, right? Military antidote to blood agents would be amyl nitrite. And just like the nerve agent, basically what it does is it keeps your body working long enough until the toxins are used up, okay? Blisters is really nasty stuff. I've got a picture here in a second. So basically they're large blisters, and the liquid inside the blisters is also a blister agent. So if you get a blister, you're going to get this huge blister. And then if that blister bursts, it's going to get all over you, and then those will turn into blisters. It's very rare because it's as much a threat to the user as it is to the victim, because if you've got, say, a blister motor around, that stuff leaks out, it gets on your crew, they've got blister. It's just very, very hard to handle, so any sane person wouldn't use it. And then you've got incapacitating stuff like CSC, NOC spray, mace. The chemical stuff, right, tear gas, that just hurts. There's some pictures of some blister agents, and how would you like to have that over, 90% of your body, and then they burst, and it just, hurts. It's just bad. Here's a picture of pinpointing the pupils, also called, meiosis, right? And when you see the guy with the pinpoint of the pupils, he's running around. It's one of two things. It depends on if you're a cop or you're into WMD stuff. But they're either on, some specific types of drugs, or, maybe a brain injury where one's pinpointed and one's dilated, or chemical warfare, right? So if you see pinpointing the pupils, it's just normal Joe that is not into drugs and nobody's whacked him on the head. That's a sign. It's not the only sign, but it is a sign. Here's some other signs, and it's got the acronym SLUDGE or SLUDGE-M if you're going to add the pinpointing of the pupils. S would be excessive salivation, guys foaming at the mouth. L is lacrimation, which is their eyes are teared up, right? U is urination. D is defecation. Normal folks don't pee and poop all over themselves, right? They're doing that while they're foaming at the mouth and tears are coming out. Those are signs of problems. G is gastrointestinal. They've got pain and bloating and gas and doubled over, and E is emesis or vomiting. So if you see these things all together, rapid onset, you know, something's not right. Let's put this with some warning signs, right? See, like I said, you're at the mall, you're at the food cart. You start experiencing some of these things, or you see a whole bunch of people with the sledge of symptoms, right? You know, ask yourself, what's going on? Did anything out the ordinary happen? Did you hear a large pop? Did somebody start spraying stuff? Is everybody else getting sick? If everybody at the mall starts puking, it's probably not one individual, right? You got them funny smells, right? Or you're outside, you see a whole bunch of dead birds, dead animals, right? If all this stuff happens, guess what? Even if it's not a chemical attack, that's still not normal. Get away. Go bye-bye. It might not be a terrorist. It might be a tractor-trailer truck hauling something bad, right? And try to be calm. And I know that sounds just crazy, but if you panic, you're going to breathe faster. You're going to inhale more. And when you're inhaling more and the poison's in the air, you're going to inhale more poison, right? So stay calm. Leave the area. If you can, head upwind and up high, right? Because a lot of the stuff is heavier than air and it's going to settle in low-lying areas. So if you can get upwind, uphill, outside, away, it's going to be better. Because remember, a lot of the stuff is the only real antidote is time, and you just need to buy yourself as much time as possible. And just like with the bio, though, the more that you breathe in, the worse your symptoms are going to be. Right? So stay calm and get away. Now, most of my WMD training either came in the military or came when I worked in the radiological section. So the rad stuff is where my focus is. There's different kinds of rad, right? It ain't just nuclear, right? You've got RDDs, which are, dirty bombs, so radiological dispersion devices. You've got INDs, or improvised nuclear devices. Those are, countries, and all they have is 2 chunks of uranium and some C4 in a big tube, They know it'll go boom, but it's not really that effective, right? Then they've got, nuclear weapons, actually tested and efficient weapons, thermonuclear type stuff. And then you've got SATMs, or suitcase nukes. There's been some recently declassified Department of Energy photos of, frogmen, the precursors of SEALs with these, about probably twice as big as a shoebox, these little round tubes strapped to their chest, getting ready to jump out of an airplane. And they wore manned portable nuclear weapons. And what the idea was is they would go down, you'd jump out of the plane, hit the ocean, swim, go into a harbor, put it in the harbor, and deny the enemy the harbor. And I've heard some stories that in the height of the Cold War, we lost a couple hundred of them somewhere in Russia, and Russia lost a couple hundred of them somewhere here in America, and you could take that, for what it is, which is a rumor, okay? So why would anybody want to use this nasty stuff against citizens or against enemies in a war? And really, it's because it's cheaper. If you want to kill everything in a square kilometer and you want to use it with guns and bombs, it costs you about $2,000. You want to use it with nuclear weapons, cost you about $800. You want to do it with nerve gas weapons, cost you about $600. You want to do it with bio weapons, cost you about $1, right? Times are tough, taxes are hard. Would you rather spend $1 or $2,000, right? So, and that's kind of a oversimplified way of looking at it, but that's a pretty standard cost. Now, it's not just what terrorists use, but it's where terrorist attacks. And when you look at transnational, meaning terrorists from one country attacking inside of another country, here's some of the 3 main things that they're going to attack: terrorism, energy, and shipping. Here's a picture of a nightclub that was attacked in 2002 in Bali. It was partly car bomb, partly homicide bomber, right? Because it's not they want to die, it's that they want to kill. And they use flash powder, which is pretty interesting because flash powder is a very potent explosive, but it's highly regulated. It's mostly used in fireworks, and this stuff is so sensitive that it can go off under its own weight if kept, in large quantities. right? But the reason they use flash power is because look at where Bali sits, right? It's very near uh, China. It's very near some large firework manufacturing factories, and so they used what they could get. Now, the reason terrorists like attacking tourism is because it has a negative economic impact on the country, right? It helps with that media framing. You go kill some people in the lower socioeconomic part of town, right? You go kill the natives, nobody cares. You go kill the wealthy guys, or you go kill the tourists, then you start getting on the news. Right? Energy is also a good target. It's got a much clearer relationship between attacking energy and attacking terrorism. And that's because energy represents the industrialized world. You go attack oil wells and oil refineries, that's going to have an impact on the West. Right? That's going to have an impact on in your gas prices. And the Taliban in particular has sought to prevent oil pipelines being built in Afghanistan, right? Depending on who you are, some people think that's the reason that we went into Afghanistan. I don't know. One way or the other, though. If you attack the oil, you attack the West. And then we've got transportation. Why do people want to attack the transportation? Well, because you get a lot more bang for your buck. Everybody's in a bus, everybody's in a train, everybody's in an airplane. You have a bombing in there, you're going to have a lot of casualties because everybody's close together. And also, it's a win-win for the terrorists. They get a lot of victims, they get a lot of attention, but the cost of protecting transportation is enormous. There are, hundreds of thousands of different transportation avenues, and DCS just cannot, protect everybody. They spent over $5 billion after 9/11 to protect aviation. That doesn't do anything for buses and planes. Planes, trains, automobiles, right? And I'll give you an example. Transportation isn't just people; it's also things. One of the nightmare scenarios is an attack on one of those big LPG tankers into Boston. You've got these big super tankers carrying liquid propane, right? A gallon of liquid propane expands to 220 gallons of gas, right? So if you've got a couple 100,000 gallons of liquid propane in a tanker, and it's coming up to the port of Boston and right there on the shoreline, if that was to blow up, it would be as devastating as a nuclear blast. It would fry everything, going deep into the city. And how do we protect against that? Well, they put cops with M16s and SWAT team and divers out when the boats approach. But what's a guy with an M16 going to do with somebody that's able to attack a propane tanker, right? So there's a lot of complications to this, and it's really hard to track down everything that could be attacked. You can get bogged down in the what ifs. Another tactic of terrorists would be suicide attacks, and sacrifice isn't new, right? From the history of mankind, it's known warriors die, right? And so, sacrificing yourself to accomplish your mission is not something that is deviant necessarily, right? Now, but there's a difference between, me as a Marine, and they say, okay, get on board the amphibious assault vehicle and go hit the beach, and we know that 40% of you will die, so we're sending 50% more of you than we need. I mean, that's not the same as take a gun and shoot yourself in the head. No thanks, dude. Right? But basically, there's three types of suicide attacks. You've got suicidal warfare, the suicide mission. You've got the suicide for principle, like the monks in Vietnam dousing themselves in gas and lighting themselves on fire. Then you've got suicidal terrorism, right? And you've got to realize these guys aren't thinking of it as suicide. Their motive is not to die. It's to sacrifice. To them, it's altruistic. It's good. It's them, benefiting the whole. And it works, right? Because a suicide bomber is a smart bomb. It's a guided missile. It's able to penetrate security. It's able to, talk itself out of situations, change. This door's locked, so how am I going to get around? And it's intimidating. You know, if this guy hates me so much, he's willing to kill himself to hurt me. You know, how do you deal with that, right? And because of that intimidation, because of that the effectiveness, it's able to reach in and get those media frames, get that media attention. It's effective against superior forces and weapons. You know, one guy with a suicide vest goes in amongst a whole bunch of guys milling around, a whole bunch of soldiers on leave, and hey guys, give me a cigarette, It's very effective, and you get high casualties out of it. The theory of it works kind of like this. All right, if you've got a group of people and they're occupied by a democratic power, all right, where all the groups have a say, all the groups kind of vote, right? You're more likely to get suicide attackers or a religious, suicide type group when there's differences between the religions of the group and religions of the government or what's supported by the majority of the people, right? So say you have a Christian nation, right? Or a nation that is predominantly Christian, and then you have a say Islamic group, right, that wants to come in. Well, because it's a democracy and they're kind of outvoted, or it's a republic and religion doesn't have a place in government, whichever, right? They kind of feel like they don't have a lot of options, right? Now, that's part of it. And then the other part is the occupied religion or the smaller group, if their religion supports altruistic suicide, because there's a difference between, I can't handle my life and I'm going to kill myself, right? And, I'm going to sacrifice my body for the whole or for the religion, right? Now, it's not just a play on words, It's not, killing is killing and death is death, especially not to these guys. And you have to understand, that it's not about them dying. It's about them sacrificing for the whole, doing the bidding of their religious tenets. And it's not just religion that has suicide bombings. There are all sorts of different models for suicide bombing, but they all have three things in common: secrecy, reconnaissance, and rehearsal. So they're gonna be quiet about their group, right? They get the guy, they come in, they train them, they don't spread that out a lot. They go out and do a lot of reconnaissance, pre-attack intelligence gathering, and it's probably not going to be the suicide bomber that does that, right? And then they're going to have a rehearsal or a dry run, right? And there's different models. You've got groups like Hamas where you've got a core group of professionals that plan. Then you've got a support group that comes and prepare. And then you get the suicide bomber, and all he is groomed to be a suicide bomber. He doesn't know how, when, or where, or anything. It doesn't take a lot of training to do that because you've got the same people doing the same job until they get really proficient at it. Then they get their suicide bomber, their martyr, bring him in, load him up, and tell him where to go. Then you've got people like the Tamil Tigers, right? They train their suicide bombers from childhood, right? And more of a special forces model. These guys know what they're doing. They're able to build the bomb, right? It takes a lot more effort to do it that way, but they get a lot out of return out of that because it's a lot more psychological benefit and a lot more sociological benefit from the group for that, right? And then you've got people like the Kurdish Workers' Party, the PKK. The suicide bombers and them aren't part of the group. It's we've got your wife, we've got your kids, we're going to kill them. You're going to die anyway. Do you want your people to live? Where you come in and you force a person to be a suicide bomber, all right? All right, so, this is a pretty in-depth subject, and I didn't really want to get too detailed because it'd be too long. But, as I said in the other video, I've got lots and lots of these type of PowerPoints, a lot of criminal justice related stuff. If you're interested, you kind of like this format. I know it's a little different than some of the other videos that I do, go on the website, go to the comments, let me know, tell me, because I'm just trying to tell you what I know to help you, right? Because I learned it through service, through working to help the public, and I want to pass that stuff along. So, if this was useful to you, let me know. If it's not, well, sorry to take up your time. But anyway, appreciate you watching. Until next time, let's get you online. www.tngun.com.